typically go by John. Okay, got the notification for the recording. As I said, my name is Jean-François. I go by John because it typically makes everybody's life a little bit easier in terms of pronunciation. I manage an organization called the IO Foundation. Stands for Input Output, for those who might be curious. And we are essentially a tech NGO advocating for data-centric digital rights. We started organically this this initiative called Project Lockdown, right during the beginning of the pandemic, and we keep carrying it up because we've been doing some changes in the way we look at it, and I'm going to be discussing a little bit more about it during the presentation. I'll try to be very concise and not to get into too many details, just to give you an overview about what the project is about and where is it that we're trying to go with it. I'm guessing you can already see my screen. If I can have a confirmation about that. All right, so
it's sorry, I'm seeing a black screen actually.
You see a black screen. Well, that would be interesting.
Yeah, me too.
Is it still the same?
No, there we go. That's good.
Okay. All right, so you just need to refresh. So you should be able to see now just the Project Lockdown and unlocking your rights as a slide, correct? Yeah. All right, so the very short story about how this came to be was me basically being bothered about the fact that everyone was concentrating on the numbers of cases around the world and getting news about lockdowns here and there, but no one was really paying attention as to how was that going to be playing out from a policy perspective, or at least no one was mapping it. So I wanted to know how much is the world clamping down all over the place, and for how long? How is that going to be looking like in the next 6-8 months? And everyone was doing a lot of projections for numbers, but no one seemed to be providing that information. And specifically in my case, I mean, I need to travel a lot for the organization to events, et cetera, and I'm not the only one. I mean, I'm definitely not traveling as much as many business people to begin with. So I was thinking, if I want to analyze the impact on how much this is going to be changing things, I need to also analyze how much migration between people, between places is going to be curtailed and for how long. And so we started just paying attention to that, and we only wanted to look at the lockdown situation. But then it became very apparent that only measuring lockdown information was kind of a waste of the time, for considering the effort that was taken into accessing the documents where that information would be published. That we decided to take it one step further, and that's how Project Lockdown, in a matter of about a week, from a very improvised conversation between me and some people on Civic Tech, ended up turning into the project that it's nowadays. So essentially, Project Lockdown is a volunteer-driven initiative. It's pretty much Civic Tech. It's open source. We haven't had anyone has been specifically hired for Project Lockdown, and we've been experiencing all of these things, highs and lows in terms of volunteering engagement because of the different stages of the pandemic, when people had a lot of free time and not so much time anymore. What we decided to do, and what we ended up being done from that very initial state that I was mentioning, is we decided that when we were looking at where the information is going to come from, there were too many different sources where you could get to know whether a lockdown was being applied or not. And definitely the one that made more sense than any other was not media, was not embassies, but basically whatever the government of a specific jurisdiction was issuing through their own official documents. And what we discovered was that if we were only going to be looking at that particular data point, those documents, I don't know if you had any experience with them, they're boring as hell. They are not the most fun documents to read. They're official statements, with a very specific type of lingo. And sometimes, as in certain places, I'm not kidding, it's basically a PDF out of a scanning of getting some paper folded by the corner. And it's totally horrible. And so if you're going to be spending 20-30 minutes reading that document, might as well get some other extra information. So we decided to select some other data points. And then the challenge was, okay, how do we justify the specific data points? What is the motivation behind that? And it immediately emerged from that the data points that made sense were the ones who could be in conflict or could be affecting human rights or digital rights to population because of those policies. And so that shaped the whole thing by looking to specifically those data points, a set of them that we'll be discussing across the team, and specifically extracted from official documents so that the information would have legal merit. Because if you start taking it, for instance, from newspaper, from the media, from all the sources, all of a sudden, if you want to use this building a proposal, for instance, for a change of a policy, because you observe that a specific thing repeated over time may be problematic, it's going to be very difficult for you to build a case. You're saying, oh, you know, this particular newspaper claims this, claims that. That doesn't really work. It has to be whatever the government is saying. And sometimes the interesting thing is what you discover is the governments are not saying that much, which on itself is a good piece of information as well. So it really gave us a very good overlook of things. The mission was very, very clear, is to try to obtain as much information as possible into specific data points that could be interesting to understand what's the state of rights. And that's when we did this, the following jump. We realized that just concentrating on COVID-19 was going to be, maybe it's not the right way to express it, but sort of containing time. I think it's going to be lasting for 2, 3, 4, 5 years until things could at some point normalize. And there was the opportunity to actually look into other thematic areas, if you will, such as immigration or national digital ID initiatives, anything that could in fact as well affect human rights and or digital rights at a given point. And so we started building the platform in that direction, so it could incorporate other data set layers. The reason as are the ones that I was mentioning, it was an attempt of trying to have a better picture in a way that would be much more digestible and easy to understand, provide the information for those who could do a deeper analysis, but also an attempt of holding governments accountable. Because like I said, even just the fact that you could pinpoint to the fact that information is not available through official channels, that's already very interesting. The general strategy, as I was mentioning, was to get those core data points as specifically oriented towards human rights and digital rights. And the reason why I'm saying core is that at times you require to get extra data points that are going to give you more context. And what I mean to say by that is, for instance, when we started working on a dataset layer on contact tracing apps, the technology behind the implementation of that particular app may not be infringing a specific human right, digital right. However, there's a difference in terms of whether they are capturing information through Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, whether it is activating on your GPS, etc., etc., etc. So those secondary or contextual data points are more extracted from expert organizations or expert sources that may have done their research, essentially because this kind of things are not always published by governments. They will tell you there's a mandate of you installing this app, and the mandate is what we are tracking when it comes to the government. But in the document, the official pronouncement that they issue, they may not go into the actual definition of what is the app doing and what is the technology that is using, how the data is being shared between different agencies and so forth. And so you need to rely on organizations that may have done their homework and done a little bit more of a in-depth study. The platform currently is still on the version 1.0, so it's still only showing the only data set layer that we have on the moment active, which is the COVID-19 one. It's the one that is right now on the website. There's a number of bugs that we are also aware, so it's by far not the most stable thing that you can build. The thing is, we had all the challenges that you can imagine, as was mentioning before, when it comes to volunteers coming in and out, documentation, etc., etc. It proved, so the experience always tells you that documenting is one of the most crucial things that you can do if you're going to have a huge rotation of people coming in and out, and also microsegmenting the tasks. So the more you can break down a big task into smaller chunks, the easier it's going to be for people to come. Even if they leave 2 weeks later, at least they may have had the capacity to achieve 2 or 3 things. In any case, any initiative as complex as Project Lockdown is in its all surface of work requires an onboarding that at least takes 2 to 3 weeks for someone to grasp the whole extension of what you're trying to do, what you're going to do, what are the sources, the tools they're using, etc., etc. And so we at some point we just only selected volunteers that could commit to a certain length of help and to a minimum number of hours a week. In terms of future plans, well, despite the fact that we only have the version 1.0 in the website, we are almost there with version 2.0. We've been working on that in the past months, and the devs have been pushing the gears as much as they could. That will come with a number of changes. There's a bit of a new refreshed interface, but also the way it's implemented is a bit more effective, and it allows us now to load dynamically all the data sets that we were going to be working on. And we are also working, so we're working on a number of data set layers as well, such as red flags. What red flags are is seemingly strange situations that you can deduce out of the information that you have. So for instance, there's one data point in the in the dataset layer for COVID-19 that is the increase of military presence on the streets, which makes sense for as long as you have a lockdown situation and you want to reinforce the roadblocks and so forth. I mean, it's okay to have a reinforcement because you might be short in cops or firefighters or whoever you're going to be putting there. The problem could be is whether that particular policy extends in time beyond the actual lockdown time. That's a strange situation. I mean, why would you want to still allow the military to be on the street? And so the red flags is essentially those kind of small things that we found that could be problematic. They may not be, but at least they are flags and people could have a look at them. We're also planning on looking into a global rights index. We haven't seen anything that is done by civil society that would be referring into getting data points from different thematic areas and then trying to make an estimation about what would be the pulse of rights around the world. So that's also under investigation. And well, there are more dataset layers and so forth. We'll also be thinking about inter-machine programs. So despite the fact that we are slowed down by capacities and so forth, the core team is very much dedicated to what's happening. And even if it's going to take us a bit longer, we'll keep trying. So we keep going to events like this one. We also always keep looking for funding, for support, and we are developing. We're also developing a partnership. Local partnership agreements where essentially we partner with local organizations and they look into the data that is going to be introduced for their particular jurisdiction, and we run with them some workshops so that they learn how to access that information, how to read those documents, and then how to extract the data. So that gives them the duality of the information just to be a bit more focused and not focused, aware of what's going on in there and how to participate eventually later on into making some changes if ever necessary. Not that anyone is requesting me to do these kind of things, but I would like to thank, even they're not listening, all the organizations that have been helping us and providing us with free services and free hosting for all of these months. I mean, they deserve that kind of recognition. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer, and I hope I wasn't that long. I think I was actually very long.
Thank you so much, though. It was so interesting. I love how it was born out of the kind of considerations of the pandemic, but it's actually so much more useful than that type of project. Does anyone have any questions?
The platform intends to map all these rights in a global level, right? So you have data, for example, from Brazil. Nice.
Correct. Yeah, and so at the very beginning, when we started with the project, we were at the height of it, we had 85 volunteers from all over the world. And the biggest team was team research that was taking care of ingesting as much data as possible. And we put together a whole system, automating between finding the sources and so forth. And the problem was, at that time, we were able to cope. I mean, we had, I think it was 150 territories around the world covered for at least a margin of 5 or 6 months. I mean, you can go back in time in the platform and you will see that there's a lot of information happening. Nowadays, that doesn't happen anymore because all of those people came back to their routine. And so all of a sudden, the ingestion of the data itself was slowed down, which essentially made us rethink what would be the different ways to ingest data. And one of the several ones that we're working at the moment is to identify governments that are interested on having transparency, and they are in fact sometimes even mandated by own legislation to be transparent and to work on open data, so that they are the ones who are injecting the data directly into the platform. That's still a challenge because there's a number of elements in terms of the format of how the data is going to be served, because there's no standard on that. That's the interesting thing. There's no standard on how to communicate policy information on a schema, on machine readable information. There's several options around the world, but none of them have very much taken over. And so that's part of the work that is also being done nowadays.
Amazing. All right, so I'm going to